Hello everyone. In this video we are just going to practice some longer proofs for our work on natural deduction using the rules of implication. So in this video I encourage you to follow along with me with pen and paper in hand and the rules of implication available for you. As they say, practice makes perfect, and really the only way to develop the skills you need to be able to complete the steps for a missing proof is to do them over and over again and get familiar with the rules of implication. So let's have a look at our first incomplete argument here. Remember, what are we doing? We are generating new lines through the rules of implication to try to arrive at the conclusion by filling in the missing steps. So the first strategy that we always want to employ is looking at our conclusion, which is set off to the right here with the forward slash. So our conclusion is T. Now try to identify where that conclusion is appearing in the premises. I see that T is appearing right here, right? So it's the consequent of a conditional. But it's embedded in parentheses as one of the disjuncts, so we can't go right away to the T. We have to do some other things to get there first. So what are we going to do? Well, I see in this argument a couple of things that are useful right away. In the first premise, I see that we have a disjunction, right? Either F or if D then T. And then I see in line 2, not F. Well, recall from our rule regarding disjunctions, DS, or disjunctive syllogism, the denial of one of the disjuncts allows us to infer the other disjunct, right? DS says either P or Q, where if we have not P, we can infer Q. The other one has to be true, right? Well, if premise 2 is denying F for us, we are able now to rip apart the wedge, as it were, and immediately infer this whole disjunct, if D, then T. So in line 4, I'm going to do that move. I'm going to apply disjunctive syllogism to line 1 and 2 to isolate if D, then T. Okay? Now remember, whenever we are generating new lines, we have to cite the lines we have used, 1 and 2, and the rule that we have applied, DS, disjunctive syllogism. Okay, so I've used line 1 and I've used line 2. Remember, you can use the lines as many times as you like, but I think it's a good idea to cross them off as you go along, because probably we're going to have to look at the remaining lines to generate the complete proof. So now we have in line 3 D, and in line 4 we have if D then T. So see if you can't generate a new line using our rules of implication. Okay, so what do we have? In line 3 we have D, and D is appearing as the antecedent of this conditional, if D then T. So I like the rule modus ponens for our next move, because it's a conditional that is working with the antecedent. Remember, modus ponens takes this form. If P, then Q. P, we have the affirmation of the antecedent, which allows us to infer the consequent, Q. So in line 5, I'm going to use modus ponens to isolate T. We are bringing together lines 3 and 4 with modus ponens to get T. So we have to cite our lines, line 3 and line 4. And we cite our rule, modus ponens. And we see that T is our conclusion, so we're there. we have derived the complete proof for the argument. We needed 2 new lines and 2 rules, disjunctive syllogism and modus ponens. Okay, let's have a look at this one. This is a little bit longer and perhaps a little bit more complex. We have 4 lines, and in the conclusion we see a conditional, if G, then E. Try to locate if G, then E in the premises. Well, I don't see if G, then E by itself, but I do see the G as the antecedent of a conditional, and I see the E as a consequent of the conditional. What rules might be relevant then? Well, we might need hypothetical syllogism, maybe we will need some modus ponens, try to get a little bit, try to anticipate a little bit what rules you think might be relevant before proceeding. Okay, so how are we gonna move it along here? Well, I think a good place to start whenever you can is to use modus ponens. And I see in line 3 I have P appearing by itself, which is the antecedent of line 1. So in line 5, I am going to apply modus ponens to lines 1 and 3 to isolate if G then T. So I am bringing down if G then T as a single statement, and I'm going to cite my lines 1 and 3, and my rule is modus ponens. All right, so we have a new line. I'm crossing off 1 and 3. And now I'm going to use modus ponens again because I see that I have Q in line 4, which is the antecedent of line 2 of that conditional. So in line 6, I get to drag down and infer the next conditional, if T, then E. And to the right, I cite my lines 2 and 4 with the same rule, modus ponens. We can use this rule as many times as we find necessary. And I'm going to cross off 2 and 4. Okay, so now we have lines 5 and 6. We have 2 conditionals, if G then T, and line 6 says if T then E. Go back to your conclusion, if G then E, and see if there isn't a rule we can use to generate a line that gets us there. The frequency of conditionals should kind of tell you that hypothetical syllogism is the rule that we need, right? Remember, hypothetical syllogism looks like this. If P, then Q. If Q, then R. Therefore, if P, then R. And we do see equivalent conditionals here that are able to allow us to infer if G then E. We have the consequent T repeated as the antecedent of the second conditional, and then we see that the conclusion is the repetition of the antecedent and the repetition of the consequent of line 2. So line 7, we are able to infer if G, then E. And I'm going to cite line 5 and line 6, and we cite our rule, hypothetical syllogism. Cross off 5 and 6. And now I see that I have if G, then E, which is our conclusion. So we're there. We have derived the necessary steps to get to that conclusion. So we needed to generate 3 new lines using 2 rules. We used modus ponens twice and hypothetical syllogism once. Let's try this argument. This is 3 lines, and our conclusion says not K. Try to look back into the premises and see if we can find it. I see a K as the antecedent to this conditional, but I don't see a not K, so we're gonna have to do some work to get there. So let's see with what we can work with. Well, in line 2, I see that I have a disjunction, either L or J, and then I see in line 3 not L. So I like the rule disjunctive syllogism because that allows me to, in a sense, rip apart this wedge and isolate J. Remember, disjunctive syllogism is the denial of one of the disjuncts, right? For any disjunction, either P or Q, where we have the negation of P, we can infer the truth of the other disjunct Q. So not L is the negation of that disjunct, with the result that we can rip apart the disjunction and isolate J. So I am going to cite line 2 and line 3, and my rule is disjunctive syllogism. Okay, so we now have J isolated, and now if I look back, I see that J is appearing as the antecedent of this conditional. So I'm going to work with modus ponens to try to rip apart that conditional and isolate the consequent if K, then L, which is appearing up here, right? So I'm going to cite line 1 and line 4, and my rule is modus ponens. All right. So now I got if K, then L. We're still not at not K, but let's see if there's anything we can do. Well, if I look back on the premises, I see that I've got not L in line 3, and that's kind of reminding me of modus tollens, which entails the denial of a consequent for any conditional if P then Q, where we have not Q, we can infer not P. And this not L is the denial of that consequent, L, with the result that we can infer not K. So you see I'm working with lines 3 and 5 and applying modus tollens. So I'm going to cite 3 and 5, and my rule is modus tollens. And I look back on my conclusion and I see I have it in line 6, so we're there. We have that not K taken by itself. So this proof required 3 lines and 3 different rules: disjunctive syllogism, modus ponens, and modus tollens. Okay? Let's have a look at this one. A little bit more complex, possibly. My conclusion is a conditional, if E then M. I've got 4 premises. I see some conditionals. I see a disjunction. I don't see E and M as a statement, but I see E as the antecedent and M as the consequent. Maybe that means I need hypothetical syllogism. Keep that in the back of your heads. But let's see what we can work with just to sort of simplify some lines here. Remember, this is a process of assembly and disassembly where we have complexity. We often want simplicity, right? We often want the ability to kind of isolate our variables. Once again, I think it's always a good idea to work with modus ponens first, if you can do so. And I do see in line 3, A taken by itself, which is appearing as the antecedent of line 1. So I'm going to isolate this conditional, if E then F, then not F, in line 5, right? Modus ponens allows me to get that taken by itself. So I'm going to write if E, then not F. Oops, sorry, it's kind of messy. And I'm going to cite my lines, line 1 and line 3, and my rule was modus ponens. All right, I've used line 1, I've used line 3. Okay, now let's see what else we can do. I see in line 2 I have a disjunction, either H or, if not F, then M. And I can see in line 4 the denial of one of my disjuncts. So for line 6, I like disjunctive syllogism, right? Disjunctive syllogism allows me to rip apart this wedge with the result that I can infer not F, if not F, then M. So I'm going to cite line 2 and line 4, and my rule is disjunctive syllogism. That's what gets me if not F. This is too messy. Let me write this again. If not F, then M. Okay, I've used line 2 and I've used line 4. Now what can we do? Well, I like hypothetical syllogism, right? Hypothetical syllogism, again, is this rule that is working with the conditional. If P, then Q. If Q, then R. If P, then R. And I do see that equivalent conditionals are lining up here with the result that I can generate if E then M, or I can infer if E then M in line 7, because I have the consequent repeated as the antecedent of the second premise, and the consequent M is going to repeat as the consequent of the conclusion. The antecedent will repeat as the antecedent of the conclusion. If E, then M. So I'm going to cite line 5 and line 6, and my rule, hypothetical syllogism. All right? And we're there. We have if E then M in line 7. So this took 3 lines and 3 rules: modus ponens, disjunctive syllogism, and hypothetical syllogism. Let's have a look at this argument. We have in the conclusion just P taken by itself. So let's see what we can do. Well, we have a lot of conditionals, so I don't know, we might need to use hypothetical syllogism again, right? But again, modus ponens is a good way to start, and I do see our antecedent N is appearing by itself in line 3. So lines 1 and 3, I can use modus ponens to isolate this consequent, if J then P. So that's going to be my first move. Line 4, I'm going to infer if J then P. I'm going to cite line 1 and line 3. My rule is modus ponens. Okay. Now what can we do? Well, I see if J then P appearing as the antecedent of this bigger conditional. So I'm going to use modus ponens again to isolate if N then J in line 5. So I'm going to cite line 2 and line 4. And my rule is the same, modus ponens. Okay. Now, what are we going to do? Well, we've got some conditionals to work with, and we have this conditional now, if N, then J. Well, I'm going to try to break apart this conditional by applying modus ponens again with lines 3 and 5, right? I see N appearing here, and that is our antecedent of our new conditional. So in line 6, I get to isolate J because we have the affirmation of N, the antecedent, with modus ponens. So I'm going to cite line 3 and line 5 with modus ponens. So it doesn't matter that we're using modus ponens over and over. As long as we're generating new lines and it's a valid application of the rule, we're good. It's perfectly valid move. Okay, so I've used line 5 now. I've used line 3 a couple of times. Let's look back over our premises and see if we can't get to the conclusion. Well, I see in line 4 the conditional if j then p. P is my conclusion, and I do see the affirmation of that antecedent j appearing here. So I'm going to apply modus ponens once more to lines 4 and line 6, and that is going to get me p taken by itself, because that j is the affirmed antecedent of the conditional if j then p. So I'm going to cite line 4 and line 6, and my rule is once again modus ponens. And finally now we have in line 7 p. P is our conclusion, and we're there. We have a complete proof procedure. We've derived all the lines for this argument. So we needed 4 lines, and each line we used modus ponens to get there. That's perfectly legitimate. Each one of these applications of modus ponens was valid. Doesn't matter that we were repeating. Okay, try to do this one by yourself, and then I will kind of guide you through it, but see if you can't complete this natural deduction using our rules of implication. Okay, let's have a look at this. Look at the conclusion. If t then n, this is conditional. Maybe hypothetical syllogism will be necessary since we have so many conditionals in this argument. But let's see how we can't start the business of simplifying or chipping away at it. Okay, let's see here. I see the ability to use hypothetical syllogism right away in lines 2 and 3, right? I see the repetition of the consequent as the antecedent in the second line, with the result that we can infer if B then not M. So I'm going to cite line 2 and line 3, and our rule is hypothetical syllogism. Now, in line 6, I see that we have if B then not M, and that is appearing as the antecedent of this conditional up here in line 1. So I like modus ponens for isolating this conditional, this consequent, if T then not S, in line 6. And I'm going to cite line 1 and line 5. And our rule is modus ponens. All right, cross off our lines. Okay, now what do we have left? Our conclusion again is if t, then n. So we're trying to get there, and I do see a possible usage of hypothetical syllogism again in lines 4 and 6, with the result that we can infer if t, then n, right? Because we have this this consequent as the repetition of an antecedent, right? So we're going to cite lines 4 and line 6, and our rule is hypothetical syllogism. So again, even though our rules are not appearing or the premises are not appearing in the standard order, hypothetical syllogism is still a valid application. All right, so I'm going to cross off 4 and 6, and now that we have if t then n, we are there. We have derived our conclusion. Okay, let's have a look at one more. We see in our conclusion not B. Try to look back over the premises and see if we can find not B. I don't see it. I see B, but it's buried in parentheses within a conditional, so we have to do some work, right, to try to isolate it. So try to derive the lines to pull out that conclusion not B using our rules of implication. Okay, let's see if we can't kind of simplify things and pull things apart here. The first move I recommend is applying disjunctive syllogism to lines 3 and 4. We see a wedge here, and we see the denial of one of the disjuncts, not D. This allows us to rip apart the disjunction and work with not A in isolation on line 5. So I'm going to cite lines 3 and 4, and our rule is disjunctive syllogism. Okay. Now in line 6, I look back and I see we have possible usage of that not A, because not A is appearing as the antecedent of this bigger conditional. So I like modus ponens for line 6 because we have the affirmation of the antecedent, not A. So now we can kind of rip apart the conditional and just infer if B, then not C. And I'm going to cite line 1 and line 5. And my rule is modus ponens. Okay. And now, if we look over again, I see another big conditional, if not D, then not C, then if not C, then A. And I see the affirmation of that antecedent, not D. So we can rip apart this conditional again with modus ponens and infer this consequent, if not C, then A, in line 7. If not C, then A. And we are citing lines 2 and 4. Again with modus ponens. Okay, we've used line 2, we've used line 4 twice. And now I see in line 6 and 7 a possible application of hypothetical syllogism, right? If B, then not C, and then if not C, then A. We have that repetition of the consequent as the antecedent in the premise, so I can infer in line 8, if B, then A. So I'm going to cite line 6 and line 7 with hypothetical syllogism. All right, so we've used 6 and 7. Now let's look back at our premises again and see if we can't hack away at line 8. And I see not A appearing in line 5 by itself. So that's the denial of the consequent, with the result that we can use modus tollens in line 9 to deny the antecedent, not B. Right? Modus tollens is if P then Q, not Q, therefore not P. So I'm going to cite line 5 and line 8 and cite my rule, modus tollens. And I see that in line 9 I have not B, and that is my conclusion. So we're there. We have completed the complete proof. We've derived all the lines needed to get to that conclusion. So we have used disjunctive syllogism, we've used modus ponens twice, we've used hypothetical syllogism, and we've used modus tollens. All right, so this has been a practice session. Remember to rewrite your rules of implication over and over again, and certainly be sure to go back and rewatch the video if you would like to run through it again, and we will do future work on this in the next video.